Fog clung to the train windows like a living thing. Sarah Moreau watched the landscape roll by through the condensation, her fingers drumming nervously on the worn armrest. October 2003. Exactly 10 years since she'd last set foot in Hollow Creek, the small town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains where she'd grown up. 10 years since she'd fled the memories. Her Nokia cell phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her sister Elise. "You close? Hurry. Strange things happening here." Sarah sighed. Elise had always had a flair for the dramatic. But this time, something in the terse tone of the message troubled her. Their grandmother Margaret had died 3 days ago, found in her armchair, eyes wide open staring at her living room window. Heart attack, the doctor had concluded. At 87, it was in the natural order of things. Yet Sarah couldn't help thinking about the last conversation she'd had with her grandmother 2 weeks earlier. The old woman had called late at night, her trembling voice carrying unusual urgency. "Sarah, sweetheart, you need to know, if anything happens to me, don't let anyone touch the cellar. You hear me? No one, especially not your Uncle Marcus." "Grandma, what's going on? Are you okay? Promise me." "I promise, but..." The call had been cut off. Sarah had tried calling back, to no avail. The next morning, reassured by a text from her grandmother, saying everything was fine, she'd attributed the episode to senility. Now, she wasn't so sure. Hollow Creek Station hadn't changed. The same broken clock still showed 3:15. The same smell of creosote permeated the wooden platform. Sarah stepped off the train with her single suitcase, scanning the parking lot for her sister. A silhouette emerged from the shadow of a maple tree. Elise was 23 now, but her face bore a gravity that aged her. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and dark purple circles underlined her green eyes. "Sarah." They embraced briefly. "Thanks for coming." "Of course. It's Grandma." Sarah studied her sister's face. "What's going on?" "Your message." "Not here." Elise glanced around nervously. In the car. The drive to the family house took only 10 minutes, but Elise remained silent, her hands gripping the steering wheel of her old Honda Civic. Sarah didn't insist. She knew her sister. When Elise was ready to talk, she talked. Margaret's house stood at the edge of town, an 18th-century stone building surrounded by a garden overgrown with weeds. The green shutters needed a fresh coat of paint. A raven croaked from the slate roof, then flew off in an ominous beat of wings. "How long have you been here?" Sarah asked, getting out of the car. "Since the day before yesterday. I've been sleeping in the old bedroom." Elise paused. "Sarah, there's something you need to see." They entered the house. The familiar scent of lavender and old wood welcomed Sarah, reviving a cascade of childhood memories. Summers spent running through the garden, winters huddled by the fireplace while Grandma Margaret told ghost stories. Sarah had always loved those stories until... This way, Elise led her to the living room. The room was exactly as Sarah remembered it. Grandma's burgundy velvet armchair by the window, the bookshelf covering an entire wall, the upright piano in the corner. But something was wrong. The walls. "My God!" Sarah approached slowly. Every wall in the living room was covered with sheets of paper. Hundreds, maybe 1,000, pinned next to each other. And on each one, the same word written over and over in trembling letters. "Remember." She did this in the last 3 days before her death, Elise explained, her voice barely a whisper. "Mrs. Dutton, the neighbor, says she heard Grandma walking all night. She was writing nonstop." Sarah touched one of the papers. The ink was black, the stroke frantic. "Remember what?" "I don't know, but that's not all." Elise walked to the bookshelf and pulled out an old leather-bound diary. "I found this hidden behind the books. It's Grandma's journal, but read it yourself." Sarah opened the journal to the marked page. Her grandmother's handwriting was almost illegible, as if she'd written in the dark or under great distress. October 3rd, 2003. It's starting again. The voices in the walls. The shadows that move when I'm not looking. I thought it was over after what happened in 1993. I had sealed the door, had the house blessed. Father Dubois promised me it would be enough. But they've come back. They want out. Marcus came yesterday. He asked to see the cellar. I refused. He was furious. Called me a crazy old woman. If only he knew. If only he remembered what we did. I called Sarah. She needs to know. She needs to remember before it's too late. Sarah looked up at her sister. 1993. I was 10 that year. Yes. Elise crossed her arms. "And do you remember anything in particular?" Sarah searched her memory. 1993, the summer of her 10th year. She remembered nothing. A complete blank. How was that possible? She recalled the summers before and after, but that one... No, nothing. That's weird. Me neither. I was 6. I don't remember anything from that summer. Elise sat on the couch. I started doing research. In July 1993, a young woman named Celine Arnaud disappeared in Hollow Creek. She was 22, an archaeology student. She was doing excavations in the area. They never found her. The name resonated strangely in Sarah's mind. Celine. Why did that name seem familiar? There's something else. Elise pulled out her own phone, a newer model than Sarah's. I took pictures in the cellar last night. You went down to the cellar? Grandma told you. I know what she told you. But she's dead, Sarah, and I needed to know. Elise scrolled through the photos. The house's cellar was old, dating back to when the building served as a way station for travelers. Stone vaults, a dirt floor, shelves loaded with preserves and old wine bottles. But in one of the photos, something caught Sarah's attention. A stone wall that looked newer than the others. And on it, roughly carved, a symbol, a circle surrounding an open eye. What is that? Sarah asked. I don't know. But when I took this picture, the temperature dropped suddenly. My breath was visible. In October. And I heard. Elise shuddered. I heard someone whisper my name. A heavy silence settled. Outside, the wind had picked up, making the old shutters groan. We need to go down to that cellar, Sarah finally said. Now. No. Tonight. When it's dark. Sarah didn't know why she'd said that, but something deep inside told her it was the right thing to do. In the meantime, I want to go see Uncle Marcus. Marcus Moreau lived on the other side of town, in a modern house that clashed with Hollow Creek's rustic charm. Margaret's younger brother. He was 75, but looked 10 years younger, tall and vigorous with a square jaw and piercing eyes. He greeted them at the door with a somber expression. Sarah, Elise. He didn't smile. I suppose you've come about the inheritance. We've come for answers, Sarah replied. What happened in 1993, Uncle Marcus? Marcus's face closed off. I don't know what you're talking about. Grandma left a journal. She talked about you. She said you remembered what you'd done. Margaret was senile at the end. She saw things that didn't exist, like the voices in the walls, the shadows. Elise pressed. Marcus ushered them inside abruptly and closed the door. Don't say those things out loud. Not here. Not in Hollow Creek. He led them to his living room, checked that the curtains were properly drawn, then poured himself a glass of bourbon with a trembling hand. You don't understand what you're doing, he finally said. Margaret was right to want the cellar to stay closed. There are things in this town, things that should stay buried. Tell us about Celine Arnaud, Sarah demanded. Marcus downed his glass in one gulp. How do you know that name? We did research. A student who disappeared in July 1993. That was 10 years ago. What does it matter now? Everything, apparently. Grandma died, tried to warn us about something. What was Celine Arnaud doing in Hollow Creek? Marcus remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he slumped in his chair, suddenly much older. She was excavating the old cemetery. The medieval cemetery, the one that's been abandoned since the 17th century. She was looking for evidence of an ancient cult. He laughed bitterly. She found it. What kind of cult? The cult of the open eye. A sect that practiced rituals, sacrifices. They believed they could open doors to other worlds, summon entities. Medieval bullshit. Except that. Except what? Marcus looked them in the eyes. Except Celine discovered that the cult had never really disappeared. That certain Hollow Creek families still practiced. Discreetly. At the full moon. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Which families? I can't tell you. But Celine was too curious. She attended a ceremony. She was seen. And then she disappeared. Did you kill her? Elise's voice was a horrified whisper. No. God, no. Marcus stood abruptly. But Margaret and I, we knew. We knew what had happened. Father Dubois, too. We tried to protect her family, told them she'd gone abroad. But we knew. Where's her body? Marcus pointed a trembling finger at the window toward the forest surrounding the town. In the Blackwoods, where they still hold their rituals. In the old chapel. In Grandma's cellar? What's the connection? Your great-great-grandfather, Edward Moreau, was part of the cult in the 19th century. The cellar. That's where they kept their objects. Their books. Their offerings. Margaret sealed everything after Edward's death in 1947. She said never again would a Moreau participate in that madness. But the cult continued without us. Sarah digested this information. Why did Grandma think it was starting again? Because the cycle returns every 10 years. The last major ceremony was in 1993. They need a sacrifice every 10 years to maintain, to keep the portal open. The portal to what? Marcus didn't answer. He walked to a bookshelf and pulled out an old black leather-bound book. Take this. It's Edward's grimoire. Margaret gave it to me to destroy, but I never could. If you really want to know, it's all in there. But I warn you, some knowledge can't be forgotten once acquired. Sarah took the book. It was surprisingly cold to the touch. One last thing, Marcus said as they prepared to leave. If you go down to that cellar, don't take anything. Don't touch anything. And above all, don't read any inscription out loud. You understand? They nodded. Outside, night was beginning to fall. The town streetlights came on one by one, creating pools of yellow light in the growing darkness. Back at Margaret's house, Sarah and Elise settled at the kitchen table with Edward's grimoire. A candle flickered between them. The house's electricity seemed temperamental that evening, the bulbs sputtering sporadically. Sarah opened the book carefully. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded by time, but the writing remained legible. It was in English, but peppered with Latin words and others in a language Sarah didn't recognize. Journal of Edward Moreau, initiate of the cult of the open, I begun in the year of grace 1923. I write these words knowing they might condemn me in the eyes of men. But what I have learned, what I have seen, transcends human laws. There exist other worlds, other dimensions that coexist with ours. And in these worlds, live entities of unimaginable power and intelligence. The cult of the open eye, founded in 1347 by the heretic monk Gregory of Hollow Creek, discovered the secret to communicating with these entities. Each decade, during October's full moon, a portal can be opened, but it requires a price, an offering of life, a voluntary sacrifice or not. Sarah felt her throat tighten. She continued reading. In exchange, the entities grant favors. Prosperity for the town. Health. Power. That's how Hollow Creek survived the plague, wars, famines that decimated neighboring towns. We are protected, but this protection isn't free. I participated in my first ceremony in 1923. I was 22. The sacrifice was a vagrant, no one anyone would care about. I told myself it was for the common good. But her screams still haunt me. The following ceremonies became easier. You get used to it. You have to get used to it. It's the price of our survival. Page after page detailed the rituals, invocations, symbols. Sarah skimmed through them quickly, her heart pounding. Then she reached an entry dated 1947. August 1947. It's over. I can't anymore. The last ceremony was too much. The sacrifice was a young woman from a neighboring town, pregnant. The others said it was an honor, that the unborn child would make the offering more powerful. But when they brought her to the chapel, when I saw her face, it was Annalise, the girl I had loved in my youth. She didn't recognize me under my hood, but I recognized her. And I knew I could never forgive what we had done. What I had done, I'm going to seal the cellar, destroy the ritual objects I have at home. The cult will continue without me. They're too many, too powerful, but I won't be part of it anymore. May God forgive me, if God still exists after what we summoned. Sarah closed the book, her hands trembling. My God, our great-great-grandfather was a murderer. The whole town was, Elise murmured. And maybe they still are. A noise upstairs made them jump. A creak, like a heavy step on the old floorboards. Someone's there, Sarah whispered. They stood slowly. Sarah grabbed a kitchen knife. They climbed the stairs, each step groaning under their weight. The upstairs hallway was plunged in darkness, barely lit by moonlight filtering through the windows. Margaret's bedroom door was ajar. Sarah would have sworn it was closed earlier. She pushed it gently. The room was empty, but on the bed, something had been placed. A black and white photograph. Sarah approached and picked it up. The photo showed a group of people in black robes in front of an old stone chapel. They all wore masks representing an open eye. On the back of the photo, a date, October 3rd, 1993. And below, 3 names written in pencil. Marcus Moreau, Margaret Moreau, Celine Arnaud. No, Elise whispered. It's not possible. Grandma and Uncle Marcus were. Sarah turned the photo over. And there, she saw it. 2 smaller figures in the front row without masks. 2 children. A girl about 10 with brown braids. A younger boy with auburn hair. It's us, Sarah said in a hollow voice. We were there. We witnessed. The bedroom window exploded. A black raven burst into the room, croaking furiously, circling around them in a frantic beat of wings. The sisters ran down the stairs, pursued by the bird. It only stopped when they reached the front door, perching atop the banister, its black eyes fixing them with disturbing intelligence. We need to go down to the cellar, Sarah said, breathless. Now! The cellar door was heavy, made of massive oak, reinforced with iron bands. Sarah pulled the rusty bolt. It resisted, then gave way with an ominous creak. The stairs descended into total darkness. Sarah turned on her flashlight. The beam of light revealed stone steps worn by centuries, walls oozing with moisture. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Elise asked, her own flashlight trembling in her hand. "No, but we don't have a choice." They descended slowly. The air became colder and colder, charged with the smell of mildew and something else. Something rotten. The cellar was vast, much larger than Sarah had imagined. The stone vaults disappeared into darkness beyond their lights. Shelves covered in cobwebs lined the walls. And at the back, the recent wall that Elise had photographed with its carved symbol. But it was no longer the only one. Identical symbols now covered all the cellar walls, glowing faintly with a greenish light. "They weren't here yesterday," Elise murmured. Sarah approached the recent wall. Up close, she could see it had been built quickly, the mortar roughly applied. Behind it, she could hear something. A whisper. No, several. Voices overlapping, speaking in a language she didn't understand, but which resonated strangely in her mind. "Sarah, look." Elise pointed her flashlight at the ground. In the packed earth, recent footprints. They led from the wall to the stairs. Footprints coming out of the wall. "We should leave," Elise said, panic rising in her voice. But Sarah couldn't move. The whispers were amplifying, now forming words she was beginning to understand. Remember, we are waiting. The cycle must be fulfilled." And suddenly, like a dam breaking, the memories returned. July 1993. Sarah was 10 years old. She remembered now. The night Grandma Margaret and Uncle Marcus woke them up, her and Elise, to take them into the forest. "It's a family tradition," Grandma had said with a strange smile. "You're old enough now." They had walked a long time through the black woods, guided by lanterns. Other people from town were there, all in black robes. They had sung songs in an ancient language. In a clearing stood a ruined chapel, and tied to the stone altar, a young woman, Celine Arnaud. She was crying, begging. "Don't look, my dears," Grandma had whispered. But Sarah had looked. She had seen everything. The ritual knife, the blood, the chants that amplified, and then the tear in the air. A fissure of greenish light pulsing like a living thing. And on the other side, shapes. Entities that should never have existed. One of them had crossed over, just for an instant, just long enough to take Celine. Sarah had screamed. Elise too. And then, nothing. Darkness. When they woke up the next morning in their beds, everything seemed normal. As if nothing had happened. Grandma had made pancakes for breakfast. The memories had been erased. Sealed. Until now. Sarah fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the images flooding her mind. Elise was beside her, in tears, also reliving that horrible night. "They made us forget," Elise sobbed. "How could they?" "Father Du Bois," Sarah said. Grandma talked about him in her journal. "He must have known a ritual. To protect our minds. The cycle must be fulfilled." The whispers were becoming more insistent. Sarah suddenly realized what they meant. October 2003. 10 years later. They're going to do another ceremony. Tonight. That's why Grandma died. She was trying to stop them. But she said the portal had to be opened every 10 years. If it's not done, then the entities will come anyway, but without control, without a sacrifice to satisfy them. Sarah stood up. "We need to go to the Blackwoods. We need to stop them." "Ow! We're two against the whole town." Sarah looked at the sealed wall. "Not the whole town, just the cult. And we have something they don't." "What?" "Knowledge of what's really happening." Edward's grimoire describes everything, including how to close the portal permanently. She ran up the stairs, Elise on her heels. In the kitchen, she frantically leafed through the grimoire until she found the page she was looking for. To seal a portal permanently, a different sacrifice is required. Not innocent blood, but guilty blood. The one who opened the portal must close it with their own life. But this will also destroy the town, for our prosperity is linked to these entities. It's a price no one will ever agree to pay. "A sacrifice of guilty blood," Sarah murmured. "Someone who participated in the rituals." Elise looked at her with horror. "You're thinking of Uncle Marcus? He was there in 1993. He participated, and now he lives with that guilt. We can't ask him to. We don't have a choice." Sarah checked her watch. 10 p.m. The full moon reaches its zenith at midnight. That's when they'll do the ritual. We have 2 hours. Marcus was waiting for them on his porch when they arrived. He wore a black coat and held an old hunting rifle. "I figured you'd come," he said simply. "You remember, don't you?" Sarah nodded. Everything. Good. Then you understand what must be done. You know what the grimoire says? About closing the portal permanently? Marcus smiled sadly. Of course I know. I've been thinking about it for 10 years. Since I saw that poor girl's face. Celine. She was my own daughter's age. He paused. Margaret wanted to do it herself, you know. That's why she died. She tried to perform the closing ritual alone, but her heart couldn't take it. The price was too high for a woman her age. So, you're going to... Elise's voice choked. It's my penance. I should have done it 10 years ago. 20 years. 30 years. Marcus loaded his rifle. But first, we need to go there. There will be cult members who will try to stop us. They took Marcus's car, an old diesel Mercedes that rumbled through Hollow Creek's deserted streets. The town seemed dead, the houses plunged in darkness. But Sarah knew it was an illusion. Behind those closed windows, how many townspeople were preparing their black robes? How many sharpening their ritual knives? The road to the Black Woods was narrow and winding, bordered by centuries-old trees whose branches formed an oppressive vault above them. Marcus drove fast, too fast for these curves, but no one said anything. How many members does the cult have now? Sarah asked. About 15 families. The Durants, the Leclercs, the Fontaines. The same ones for generations. They have children, whom they initiate in turn. An endless cycle. And they really believe it's necessary? They've seen the prosperity it brings. Hollow Creek has never known unemployment. No crime. Crops are always good. Children are born healthy. Marcus sneered. All for the price of one sacrifice every 10 years. For them, it's a rational calculation. It's madness. It's human nature. We're capable of justifying anything if we gain something from it. They arrived at a fork. Marcus turned off the headlights and parked on the shoulder. From here, we continue on foot. The chapel is a 20-minute walk. The nocturnal forest was a world apart. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their bare branches scratching the starry sky. A light fog floated close to the ground, giving the scene a dreamlike quality, or nightmarish. Marcus led the way, his rifle on his shoulder, a flashlight in the other hand. Sarah and Elise followed, holding hands as they did when they were children and afraid of the dark. After 10 minutes of walking, they began to hear the chants. It was distant at first, a whisper carried by the wind, then more and more distinct. Male and female voices mixed, chanting in that ancient and terrible language Sarah now remembered hearing 10 years ago. A greenish glow filtered through the trees ahead of them. Marcus raised a hand, making them stop. He turned off his flashlight and signaled them to do the same. They advanced in darkness, guided by the strange light. And then they saw it. The chapel. It was a medieval structure in ruins, its stone walls covered with moss and ivy. The roof had collapsed long ago, leaving the interior open to the sky. But it wasn't the chapel that captured attention. It was the rift. At the center of the chapel, above the ancient altar, the air itself seemed torn. A fissure of greenish light pulsed and undulated like a living wound in the fabric of reality. And on the other side, shapes moved, silhouettes that had no fixed form, that changed and mutated constantly. Around the chapel, about 20 people in black robes formed a circle. Some Sarah recognized. Mr. Durant, the butcher. Mrs. Leclerc, the retired teacher. Dr. Fontaine, who had treated her when she had chickenpox. Normal people. Neighbors. Monsters. And tied to the altar, a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her blonde hair stuck to her face with sweat and tears. She wasn't screaming. She seemed in shock, eyes fixed, mouth open in a silent howl. "My God," Elise whispered. "That's Sophie Arnaud, Celine's niece." Sarah felt her blood run cold. Of course, the cult had a twisted sense of symmetry. 10 years after sacrificing the aunt, they were taking the niece. Marcus checked his rifle. "Here's the plan. I'm going to create a distraction. While they're dealing with me, you free the girl and run. You don't stop, no matter what happens. You understand?" "And you?" Sarah asked. "I'll do what must be done." He pulled a page from the grimoire out of his pocket. I copied the closing incantation. Once I've recited it and spilled my blood on the altar, the portal will close. Forever. But that will kill you. That's the point. Marcus placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Tell my children I'm sorry. For everything." Before they could protest, he stepped out of their hiding place, shouting, "Stop. In God's name, stop." The cultists turned around, surprised. Marcus raised his rifle and fired in the air. The gunshot echoed like thunder through the silent forest. Chaos erupted. The cultists rushed toward Marcus. He fired again, this time aiming for the legs of an approaching man. The man collapsed, screaming. Now! Sarah grabbed Elise's hand, and they ran toward the chapel. The cultists were too busy with Marcus to pay them attention. Sarah reached the altar. Sophie Arnaud looked at her with empty eyes, not seeming to understand what was happening. "We're getting you out of here," Sarah said, starting to undo the ropes. But the knots were tight, complex. Elise pulled out a pocket knife and began sawing through the bonds. Behind them, Marcus was fighting. A rifle, but here, a kick there. But he was old, and they were many. Sarah saw him fall, engulfed by a mass of black ropes. "Faster," she cried. The last rope gave way. Sophie collapsed into their arms. She was barely conscious, probably drugged. "Go!" Marcus's voice rang out, hoarse and painful. He had managed to free himself and was now crawling toward the altar, leaving a trail of blood behind him. "Leave!" Sarah and Elise dragged Sophie out of the chapel. The cultists saw them, but something held them back. Something in the rift. It was pulsing more violently now, the greenish light becoming almost blinding. The shapes on the other side pressed against the barrier, trying to pass through, and that barrier was thinning. Marcus reached the altar. He pulled the page from the grimoire out of his pocket and began reading, his voice weak but determined. The cultists realized too late what he was doing. They rushed toward him, but an invisible force pushed them back. The rift was reacting to the incantation, pulsing in rhythm with Marcus's words. Sarah stopped at the edge of the chapel, unable to look away. She saw Marcus pull a knife from his belt. She saw his lips move, forming the last words of the incantation. And then he plunged the knife into his own heart. Blood spurted, splattering the stone altar. And immediately, the rift reacted. The greenish light became blinding, then began to shrink. The shapes on the other side screamed, a sound that was nothing human, that froze the soul. The cultists screamed too. Some fell to their knees, others fled into the forest. But all felt the same thing. Their connection with the entities was breaking. The centuries-old pact was dissolving. The rift closed with a sound like a thunderclap. Then silence. Marcus lay motionless on the altar, his eyes open staring at the starry sky. A slight smile floated on his lips. Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Rest in peace, Uncle Marcus. 3 months later, January 2004, Sarah stood in front of her grandmother's house, her house now. Elise had decided to stay in Hollow Creek to care for Sophie Arnaud, who was slowly recovering from the trauma. The town had changed. Without the protection of the entities, Hollow Creek was discovering normalcy. The baker had gone bankrupt. 2 children had fallen ill with the flu. It had rained for 3 weeks straight, damaging the crops. But there were no more sacrifices. No more cult. No more fear. The cult members had been arrested. Some had confessed, overwhelmed by guilt. Others denied everything, but the evidence was there. The police had found Celine Arnaud's remains in the chapel, exactly where Marcus said she would be. Sarah had gone down to the cellar one last time, before having the door permanently sealed. The symbols no longer glowed. The whispers had ceased. It was just an old cellar now, cold and damp and dead. She had burned Edward's grimoire in the fireplace, watching the pages blacken and curl. Some knowledge shouldn't be preserved. In the living room, she had removed all the sheets of paper bearing the word remember. But she had kept one, framed on the mantelpiece, because it was necessary to remember, not the rituals or incantations, but what people were capable of when they were afraid, or when they wanted something badly enough. The black raven perched on the windowsill. It was the same one, Sarah was certain. It came every day now, watching her with its intelligent eyes. She didn't know if it was a messenger from the entities, a ghost, or just a bird. But she had learned to live with uncertainty. Some mysteries had to remain unsolved. Sarah smiled at the bird, then closed the curtains. In the kitchen, Elise was making coffee. Sophie was reading a book by the fireplace, her hands hardly trembling anymore. Life went on. Different, perhaps. Harder, certainly. But real. True. Freed from the shadows of the past. Outside, the first snow of the year began to fall on Hollow Creek, covering the town with a white and pure blanket. A new beginning. The raven flew off into the night, carrying with it the last echoes of a time when the boundaries between worlds were permeable, when the old gods could still cross over. That time was over, or at least that's what Sarah told herself. But sometimes, late at night, she still heard a whisper, a word repeated infinitely by a voice that no longer existed. Remember. And she remembered. Subscribe for more videos.